Welcome to the Career Ready Podcast. Learn about resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, interviewing, and all things you need to be career ready with the Career Services Center at College of DuPage. I'm one of your hosts, Pierre Michaels. Later in today's episode, you will hear an interview with Amanda Whiddon, an executive and corporate recruiter with the Berman Auto Group.
And I'm another one of your hosts, Michelle Malik. I'm going to be ending the episode today with this week's question, which was submitted to our listener mailbag at careerpodcast@cod.edu. This question's about how to follow up after an interview, but first we're going to hear from one of our other hosts, Rebecca Harrington.
Thanks, Michelle. I'm going to start our episode today with some information about the Career Ready competency of professionalism. So this is our competency of the day. Professionalism is one of the 8 top competencies from NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers. It has gone up in importance to employers over the last few years. So I figured I'd start with a definition from NACE. Quote, knowing work environments differ greatly, understand and demonstrate effective work habits, and act in the interest of the larger community and workplace. So that's a lot of words. I think most of us can imagine what professionalism looks like on a basic level, showing up on time, being polite, following the rules. But let's maybe connect a little bit of the ideas from that definition to those behaviors. And I'm just going to focus on one part of it, which is understand and demonstrate effective work habits. We may not always realize it, but this relates to the job search as well as at work. We want to remember that we start to demonstrate our level of professionalism the moment we apply to the job. In other words, we want to show an employer that we can respond to emails and phone calls in a timely manner. We want to demonstrate that we can show up on time to meetings by showing up on time for our interview. It isn't just how we behave during the quote-unquote official interview that employers will judge us on our level of professionalism. And this can influence how they hire us too. So I thought I'd ask you guys, are there any other behaviors that you can think of during the job search process that would show your professionalism?
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about this a little bit later, but obviously following up after an interview, if you are offered a position, getting back to the employer in a timely manner because they have a lot of candidates.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm.
Pierre, how about for you?
Yeah, and really just being respectful throughout the process, right? So the follow-up, the communication, that's all part of it, but the way we present ourselves, the way we're communicating through that can really have an impact in that professionalism through that messaging. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, really, this is you wouldn't think that professionalism could be complicated, and it's not, but there is a lot more to it than we sometimes think of. So we will definitely come back to this competency again. But I think, we've been talking a lot about job search, and I think it's helpful to think about how we can start demonstrating these competencies right from the beginning. And professionalism is one of the biggest ones out there. So there's a lot to talk about with it.
For today's interview, I'm extremely excited to have Amanda Whiddon here with us. She's the executive and corporate recruiter with the Berman Auto Group, which means she's in the trenches of the hiring process. Amanda, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me today. A little bit about myself. My name is Amanda. I'm the executive and corporate recruiter for all of Berman Auto Group. I've been in the automotive industry for a little over 7 years now. If you're not familiar with this company, a little background on us. Berman Auto Group is family owned and operated. We've been around for over 35 years. We have 7 dealerships and a corporate office located all throughout the Chicagoland area. So we represent Subaru, Nissan, Infiniti, and Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram manufacturers. So when I started out in the industry, I actually started as an executive assistant to the vice president of fixed operations. Within that position, I quickly learned all about the service and parts side of the industry, also known as fixed operations. At that time, the company only had a sales recruiter, and my boss oversaw all of the fixed ops recruitment. So part of assisting him meant that I needed to be able to help alleviate the work that was on his plate. And a lot of the work on his plate at that time involved recruiting. So he was very quick to introduce me to that. I learned everything from what an applicant tracking system was, to using it, to reviewing resumes, writing up job descriptions, posting to job boards, holding phone interviews, assisting in conducting the in-person interviews, the entire onboarding process from beginning to end. Within the first 2 years of working as his EA, I shadowed various fixed ops positions to fully learn what skills were needed to best fill those positions. After year 2, I started to shadow the corporate office personnel to learn how to recruit for them, and then eventually made my way into the sales side of the business. So essentially, I shadowed nearly every position in the company to best learn how to recruit for every department there was. And by year 3 within the company, we no longer had our sales recruiter, and I transitioned to become the full-time executive and corporate recruiter for all of Berman Auto Group.
It's quite a journey within the company. And as you got started off there, things kind of changed a little bit for you, and you did get a little bit of that exposure. But how did you make those changes through the course of your career happen?
It took a lot of hard work. I would stay late often. I would get to work early. When there were things I didn't know how to do, I'd go home after work. I'd watch YouTube videos. I remained teachable, and I wanted to learn the ins and outs of the industry. No one asked me to do any of those things, but I put forth 100% in any job I've ever had, and I treat it kind of like the golden rule, which is treating others the way you want to be treated. So I did the same towards this company. It may sound a little excessive to some people to do all of those things, but I truly felt that it would pay off in the end, and I believe it has. I think pretty quickly into my career, my boss saw that recruitment was something I took a liking to. I became very good at it. And since it wasn't my full-time position in the beginning, I really couldn't give it my all until year 3. And that's when I really started to flourish as a recruiter. So starting out as his EA and then really getting to learn and lean into recruiting showed both of us that we had kind of found an unexpected sweet spot for me in the company. So throughout my tenure, I've been able to really build trust with all of the hiring managers. They know that when they need a position filled, I will do my absolute best to find the best fit for them.
Yeah, that determination, that hard work, certainly pays off a lot through a course of a career. So it's great that you had that opportunity to leverage those opportunities to make something happen here. On the hiring side, I know you review applicants for a lot of different positions. What does that evaluation process look like for you? And does that process vary based on the type of position?
Yeah, so the evaluation process does differ a little bit depending on the position and depending on the level role that it is. So for example, if we were to look at the porter position in the automotive industry, this position entails cleaning vehicles, shuttling customers, moving cars to and from the service bays. So when someone's applying for this position, they don't necessarily need to go through an extensive evaluation process, such as, a phone interview, 2 in-person interviews, et cetera. This is a position that when you're applying for it, the job description pretty much states exactly what you'd be doing in the role. And as long as you're comfortable with the responsibilities listed, you have a clean driving record, and the schedule and pay works for you, you really kind of skip over all of the extras in the evaluation process. We have you come in to meet with the hiring manager, and the hiring manager typically determines immediately, either during or right after the interview, whether or not it's going to be a good fit and give a job offer. Now, let's say we're looking for an automotive technician. This is a position where there are many different levels. There's lube technicians, level 2 technicians, apprentice technicians, master technicians. This is a position where I would need to hold a phone interview with the candidate to best ensure that the skills align with the level tech that we're looking for. These phone calls can range from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on the type of conversation we get into, how much of a talker the person is. If everything aligns, from there, we'd move forward to the in-person interview. The hiring manager makes a decision on the job offer thereafter. The same could be said with a sales associate. It's a very similar process. I hold the phone interview, we move forward to the in-person interview, and the manager decides thereafter. But now let's skip all the way to a high level or executive position. This process is weighed very heavily. So when I hold a phone interview with these types of roles, these are hour-long phone calls. I gather much more in-depth information from the candidate. I get specifics on their numbers, on what their service drive looked like, how many employees they're overseeing. I ask them if they'd be willing to provide documentation for me. All of that is needed before they're even able to go to the next step in the hiring process. And the next step thereafter would be a phone interview with a higher level executive. But in order for that to happen, they would have to provide that documentation. If all goes well with the next phone interview with the high-level executive, then they typically hold an in-person interview and then one more final in-person interview with the other executives or higher level role that they'd be working alongside. So it definitely varies by position.
Yeah, and a lot for you to keep track of regardless of the position. They're going through a lot to present themselves to you. So as you're going through these different stages, are there common threads that you're looking for as you're reviewing applicants, regardless of that position or entry-level executive, the type of work?
Yeah. So on paper, I look for transferable skills or skill sets, depending on the level. So that's huge. Job loyalty is another one. And when I say that, it's more so, are they job hopping every 2 months? It doesn't mean you need to stay in a job that you hate your entire life. But I'm looking at, have you held 15 different jobs in the last 6 months or even the last year? I look at experience if it's required within the position. And I also look for location of the candidate. Location is a factor that I don't think many people really think about as heavily as they should. And the reason I say this is because I experienced this myself. So when I started in the company, I was only 25 minutes away from the office with traffic. A few years later, I ended up moving. And before I started working remotely, when there was traffic, it would take me 2 full hours to drive one way to work. So every day, 4 hours a day, I drove in Chicago traffic. It was miserable. No amount of money or job title is worth something like that. And that's the quickest way to ruin your work-life balance without even trying. So location is another factor that I consider for people, and I think that candidates should consider for themselves as well.
So with that, you mentioned transferable skills being important. So as you're looking at applicants, what do you find more important, those industry and job-specific skill sets or the transferable soft skills?
So that will also depend on the position. There are certain jobs that require specific skills. For example, if we're going to stick with the automotive industry, I couldn't walk in and start performing a coolant exchange on your car without knowing the hard skills of how to perform the job, right? So I couldn't hire someone to be a tech without having those skills to perform the job. But let's say you're looking to get into sales. You're personable, you're eager, you're comfortable approaching someone you've never met. Those are skills that transfer extremely well. Those are not specific to the job itself. You don't have to have car sales experience to sell a vehicle. Something that I think is relatable in any and every position is remaining open to learning and being trainable, teachable, and coachable.
To have that need to just desire to learn and take in new things regardless of the position. I think that's really valuable for any job seeker, regardless of industry, to know that employers want you to be growing on that job. So as we think of these different skill sets, are there specific skill sets that you look for in all applicants?
I'd say yes. So when I'm talking to an applicant over the phone, I listen for a few things. What does their character appear to be like? Are they bashing old jobs, bosses, coworkers? Are they coming across as rude or unkind? Or are they speaking kindly about their previous coworkers, teams, bosses? Are they someone who wants to learn or is teachable? You don't have to be someone who wants to climb the corporate ladder, but are you someone who's open to learning and helping others? Some of the best and most successful hires I've made in the company are those who have remained teachable and they've continued to flourish. I'd say that kind of includes myself as well. Even though obviously I didn't hire myself, I remained teachable. And if I had walked in on that first day and said no to learning recruiting just because that wasn't in my job description, I really wouldn't be where I am today. And the other final thing I really look for is honesty and integrity. I know that can be somewhat difficult to gauge while on a phone call, but the things that I'm listening for is what they are telling me aligning with what they wrote on the resume. Are they appearing to keep their story somewhat straight? Sometimes I'll ask a question and later revert back to the response. And when someone's not being honest, they easily get caught up in their lie. So for example, they may have told me in the beginning they were looking to leave their current job. They felt they weren't growing. And then later on, when I asked them how their boss, might rate their performance, it'll end up coming out, actually, I don't work there anymore, or my boss doesn't like me. I don't know why. That's why I'm looking to leave. So things aren't really adding up or aligning with what they told me in the beginning of the conversation. So honesty and integrity is another trait that I'm looking for.
Yeah, that honest integrity just like that desire to learn, very valuable regardless of that position. So you may have hit on this just a little bit there, but is there something a candidate can do that will send them to an instant reject pile?
So there's a few things. Instant rejections via an application are pretty simple. If you're applying for a job that requires you have a driver's license and you state on your application you don't have one, you will be rejected. If you're applying for a full-time position and then you notate you're only looking for part-time work, you're going to be rejected. I think a lot of people mass apply to jobs, especially on Indeed with the quick apply function, without really reading the job descriptions in full. On the descriptions I write up, I always put the schedule, the pay, the basic minimum requirements. So that way, essentially, I don't want to be wasting your time either. I want you to know all of these things up front. An instant rejection over the phone would be someone who isn't paying attention while we're on the phone interview. I've talked to people who will tell me, oh, I'm grocery shopping right now, but don't worry, I can focus. And they'll ask me, oh, can you repeat this question? Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening, or I was talking to the attendant there. I've talked to people who will interrupt me and start talking to other people in the background or start talking over me. Those things in my mind are not so great. So that would be more of an instant rejection. And when you get to the phone interview stage with me, that means that you're the one who scheduled this phone call. I send you a calendar link and you schedule the call. I say this because there are a lot of people that I call at the scheduled time that they chose who tell me when they answer the phone, I'm not available to talk right now. Can you call me in 20 minutes? Can you call me tomorrow? Sorry. And I'll say, okay, well, I gave you this. I gave you the link to select the day and time that works for you. This was the time that you chose. Why are you no longer available? And I know that there are times that there's a legitimate reason, but when that's the case, they can send me an email. They do have my email address. And better yet, in that same calendar link, there's an option to reschedule yourself. So there are things like that. And then one of the other things that would make you a little bit of an instant rejection is if at any point you end up receiving a rejection letter from applying for another position in the company and you respond to that rejection letter in a disrespectful way, not only does that affirm the decision, but it will make it so you're not considered for another position in the company. So if I send you a message saying that the manager selected a different candidate for the position and you respond with something along the lines of tell the manager to go screw himself, then I'm going to notate that on your profile. So that way, when you reapply for another position in the company, all of the hiring managers and myself will see that note as reference. And interestingly, there are a lot of people that reapply to various positions in the company and different locations.
I find it sad that you have to say that as a situation, but I'm sure that's happened to make you bring it up. Why don't you just pay attention and be respectful? If you want this opportunity, you got to present yourself well.
Absolutely. And if on a phone interview, if this is you putting your best foot forward, or on a rejection letter, I could only imagine what it would be like if things didn't go well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but a lot of good information in there, just as far as, paying attention to the application, knowing what you're applying to, being able to, stay consistent in what you're communicating. So as we wrap up here, what would be that number one piece of advice you want to share with a job seeker?
So the number one thing that I'd share is that I know looking for a job can become frustrating and sometimes discouraging. But remember that finding the right job is also a two-way street. As much as a company is looking to find the right fit and the right candidate, you need to be sure that you feel you found the right fit for yourself as well. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to place value on yourself either. No one will be happy in the end if you aren't happy with the job that you select for yourself. So be genuine, be respectful, be excited, just be yourself. And all of that really applies to the interviewing side as well.
Yeah, true words of wisdom there, right? They're not just interviewing you. You're also interviewing to make sure the company's the right fit. Amanda, as always, thank you. It's great chatting with you. This information is so valuable. I know I appreciated hearing it. I know our listeners can really value from it. So once again, thanks for coming here and sharing your insight.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Michelle and Rebecca, there were so many great things that Amanda shared in that conversation. but what specifically stuck out to you?
Yeah. So what I thought was really the most surprising was when Amanda mentioned how some candidates carry themselves during or after an interview. That was wild. Like, for example, answering a phone call for an interview at the grocery store, or even just responding to a rejection letter in a really rude way. I thought it was interesting because she mentioned that if they try to reapply, those comments are already on their file. So I thought that was interesting to know. But it just kind of goes to show you that you want to put your best foot forward and not burn any bridges, because you never know what types of opportunities are going to pop up along the way. And again, we want to act professionally. So I have an example of this. When I was interviewing for a position at a different company long ago, I didn't end up getting that position. I was really bummed about it. But what happened was the manager, she actually added me on LinkedIn. And when she added me on LinkedIn, I was like, oh, okay, like this is a great connection. I didn't really think much else of it. But what happened was a few months later, that same position I had interviewed for actually opened up again, and she personally reached out to me to reapply for it. I didn't end up reapplying for it because I was already at a different job, but it just goes to show you, you don't want to burn any bridges. Opportunities can come up from anywhere. And this actually just happened to my friend as well. She didn't get a position either, and she's actually working for the same company and in a different role. So
Yeah, I think a lot of us have stories either of our own or friends, that had that happen. And it's important to think about our competency of the day, right? Where professionalism matters. And that is what, will get you a long way in that job search process.
yeah.
Definitely. For me, I was struck when she talked about being teachable or coachable, right? Trainable, whatever you want to say. And, some of that goes with, it kind of depends a little bit on the position, how important that is. But my example is when I worked as a trainer, so trainer, teacher, career specialist, there you go. But as a trainer, one of the things that I always said was I always wanted to hire trainers that could train. Like, I can teach you the content, but I can't teach you how to train. You have to, I can a little bit, but you have to have some comfortability and just ability of being able to stand in front of people and teach them something. Again, the content, we can work on that, but having some of those core skills, so that's what she was talking about with a salesperson, right? That I can teach you the content about the car or whatever, but I can't, totally teach you how to sell. I can give you we can give you some tips, but we want that kind of underground of yes, I have experience or comfortability with communicating with people. And I think that's important to think about. Though it does depend on the job though, right? She was talking about that, Pierre, about some jobs are more.
Yeah, like the porter position or, the auto mechanic, actually, the technician working on the car, right? You need those job-specific skill sets, but when you can learn those other pieces of the job, it could be really valuable. And just to share a little bit more about Amanda, when she was answering her question or kind of giving her story, she focused in on her experience with Berman Auto Group. But before that, she didn't work in automotive at all, right? Before that, she was a dental assistant.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then before that, I think she was an assistant for some other small company, right? And now she's, a corporate recruiter. But she doesn't have that training in recruiting. But she had this experience as being an assistant to basically a small business owner and as that dental assistant. So that's why she started off as an assistant to the CEO of Berman Auto Group. And then she took on that coachability and observed everything and just kept on learning and learning. And that's what let her grow to this position in her 7 years. So being able to talk about looking for that, that's because she's experienced that. Right? And I think that's something that we have to remember. These recruiters, they have their own stories and they have their own experiences, so they can relate to people when they're evaluating them. So to make sure that they're relating to or back to that recruiter in a respectful way can have a big impact. And if you're not, those notes are taken and that is, written down within the company that, hey, this is someone that hasn't been respectful in the past. We may not be evaluating them in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I think not being respectful or not being aware of your surroundings and that grocery store thing, it actually does. It reflects on a lot of things, but it does reflect on that coachability.
Right.
If you're someone that isn't aware of, have that situational awareness of where you are and what's going on and what the expectations are, how are you someone that's going to be excited to learn on the job and do the things that you need to do to move forward in your career, which is something that employers want. They want employees that want to learn and grow and continue on with them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's two other quick things I just want to note from that interview. One thing that as far as that evaluation process and how that changes for position to position, just want to throw that out there for our listeners. As you're seeking that job, no, there is no cookie cutter method that a company is using. Even within a company, it's going to vary. Mm-hmm. So once you think you got that process down, well, it may change. So be flexible as you're searching for that job, because all companies and even within companies are going to have different methods. Another thing I want to throw out there is just this idea of when you are interviewing, you're also interviewing the company. You're making sure this is the right fit for you. Yes, they want to hire the best candidate, and you want to prove that you're the best candidate, but you also want to make sure that what you're getting yourself into is going to be valuable to you moving forward as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, again, that's something that she talked a lot about phone screening, and I think that's a big part of it. That's become a bigger part of it. And that process, because, hey, we don't want to waste anyone's time. We don't want to waste our time, and we don't want to waste your time. So let's make sure we kind of get some of those initial questions. And we always say you should have questions, right? So
yeah. Well, I was just going to mention that too. I think that's why it's so important to have those questions at the end of the interview, because again, that's where you turn it around and now you're interviewing the employer to make sure it's a good fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Not just a good fit, but also then you're showing your interest in the position, right? So all these components of the job search have multiple reasons why we recommend you do them.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So as we think of being involved through that process, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the interview as Michelle answers a question.
Thanks, Pierre. So Amanda spoke a lot about professionalism during the hiring process, and we actually had one listener ask us the following question: how do I follow up after an interview? Should I send an email or a card? And that's a wonderful question. So one way to maintain that professionalism during an interview is to send a thank you after the interview actually happens. So I have a few tips here, and we'll go through these. So first, you want to send a thank you to each individual interviewer that you met with, and send that within 12 to 24 hours while the interview is still fresh in everybody's mind. Also, if it's an in-person interview, you can ask for business cards just to make sure that you have the correct contact information and that you can spell everybody's names correctly as well. Within that thank you, you want to thank all of the interviewers for their time, and you can also restate some of your main points, add any information that you may have forgotten to mention during an interview. I know that's happened to me sometimes. I personally like to add an example of what I learned or something that I found interesting in the interview, just to show that I was paying attention, and that could really make you stand out too. Lastly, a handwritten card may also make you stand out in the interview process. So if you do have an in-person interview, you can give them a handwritten card as a thank you. But there's a few tips on that as well. So we say that no matter what, you always want to send an email as a thank you. So if you do choose to give your interviewers cards, you can turn them into the receptionist, for example, at the end of the interview before you leave. However, there's really no telling when an interviewer is going to open that card. So it's always best to follow up with an email just to ensure that you thank the interviewers in a timely manner. I think that having a handwritten card is a great personal touch, and it's something that they can receive in addition to that email.
Definitely. And I just want to reiterate the ask for a business card.
Yes.
Or ask for people's names and just jot them down if it's a online interview, because I am the worst at forgetting to do that. And then afterwards, you're like, okay, well, there can't be that many Sarah Smiths at this company. And you're trying to find, and you're like, is this the right one? I don't know. So definitely make sure you get the spelling of names and a business card if you can.
Yeah, it is so hard to find people's names. I'm also thinking, okay, like I can totally find this interviewer's name on the website, and it never happens. So, so if you have a listener mail question, be sure to email us at careerpodcast@cod.edu. I also wanted to take this time to ask, is there anything else that we wanted to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I wanted to actually just talk a little bit about the month of October. I know you guys like to celebrate it for the spooky goodness of it.
Michelle and I really do like the spooky.
Yes, Halloween is the best.
But did you know October is also National Disability Employment Awareness Month?
Oh,
I mean, we did know, but...
Yeah, I did, but no, tell us more.
All right, so that's a long title, but it's about awareness of people with disabilities and that need for employment. Because when we look at the statistics, right, we know that they tend to be unemployed at a rate almost double of that of people without disabilities. But other statistics that aren't shared as often, we don't have to do a deep dive into all this, but studies have been done, they've been pulled together, and we know that people with disabilities are just as good as workers as people without disabilities. We also, from these studies, sometimes get hints that they're more dedicated workers than those without disabilities. And this was done by the DuPage Group or corporation, the DuPont studies, and they stopped doing them because they realized that they keep getting the same evidence of people with disabilities being good workers. So just want to throw that out there as we're creating the awareness, living in this awareness of the month and continuing this conversation. And I also wanted to throw out a movie recommendation.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, I know we all like our movies. So this was kind of just, flew under the radar, I think. It came out in 2007. It's called Music Within. It's based off the true story of Richard Petitmill. And he was a Vietnam vet that during the war, he lost his hearing. And he wanted to take advantage of some of those veteran benefits. But at that time, they wouldn't give him any because he was deaf. He couldn't work. So he became an advocate, and he worked to get vets jobs, and he started training corporations on how to work with vets. So it's a great story, great movie. He was also a strong advocate for the ADA, which wasn't the first law, but the American with Disabilities Act was a very important law to help continue that fight of people with disabilities finding employment. So just want to throw that out there and make sure you check out that movie.
That sounds like a great movie.
Yeah, I'll have to add it to my list. Thank you.
All right. Thank you to all of our listeners, and special thanks again to Amanda Whiddon for joining us on the podcast today. Be sure to join us for our next episode as we talk about surviving the stress of the job search. And of course, one more reminder, email us at careerpodcast@cod.edu and follow us on social media at COD Career Center. Thanks, everyone.